Okay, well, I should just clarify current work. It's these days it's volunteer work on the World Heritage stuff. The project is with Adelaide Council now, but also a combination of Adelaide Council, the Adelaide Hills Councils going all the way from the bottom of the Fleurieu to Clare. Okay, this idea of a heritage as a future-making tool has interested me for a while now. There's a group of people who are based in England but across the world who call themselves heritage futures people. And they look at heritage in an interesting new way. They bring people from outside the heritage profession, everything from people who are looking after nuclear waste, as something where you have to look well into the future for. So I kind of find this idea of heritage as a future-looking discipline very interesting. And it certainly fits in with this World Heritage project. I think Adam Nicholson was a landscape designer, but this sort of comment raises what I'm trying to think about is that, clearly Norm's paper and way of approaching a future plan for Adelaide is very much embedded in the history of Adelaide, and I think that any future planning obviously ought to be. So I think that's, where that combination of future looking but also looking backwards to see what's happened in the past. And I often do like to use the metaphor of a garden. When we garden, we may inherit a garden or we may plant a garden, but over the years it's very much as we look forward to what we're doing with our garden, it's also a decision about what we take forward. So we take stuff out, but we also take stuff forward. So I find that another kind of, when we think of gardening, we're always planning ahead, but we're always making decisions about what we're going to take with us as we move ahead. So that's probably the essence of this concept of heritage as a future-making concept. So to this particular project for Adelaide and the hills, that's the map, one of the early survey maps. The original surveys of South Australia, as you see, were these ones, A, B, C, D, E and F, I think. They were the preliminary surveys. And then these sort of red-coloured ones through the hills were the special surveys. So they were the two original large survey areas of South Australia. And as a map, that sort of provides the general context of this project. I should actually say this before. I pulled this all together just in the last couple of days, and I didn't have time to do the references, but I think this map, it'd be sort of obviously prior to the survey of Adelaide, or around it's around that 1836, 37. It's in the Flinders University Library, I can tell you that much. I've been to have a look at it, and it's in that set of maps in the Flinders University Library. Also available, the digital version, through Adelaide Library. But sorry, reference list today. Okay, so this whole project's, obviously the idea of listing either the Adelaide Parklands or the Adelaide Plan and the Adelaide Layout has been around for a while. They made it onto the National Heritage List already, and it's been a part of Council's strategy to look at World Heritage listing either the plan and the parklands or some version of. Also looking at a listing of the rural landscapes has probably been around for about 10 years now. And at the core of all this is, again, this future forward-looking project. It's not just about obviously a lot of it is about, protecting what's here, but it is about how to carry forward the precious inheritance into the future. And the and at the heart of the rural landscape is, that things get saved if they're productive. It's a bit like the idea of a building. If it's being used, it lasts. If it's neglected, then it doesn't last. So at the heart of this idea of listing the rural landscapes is to give them a value that helps them to continue into the future. So adds value not just to the land itself, but to the produce that comes off that land. And this is just a quick overview of what World Heritage Listing is about. At the moment, we're looking at this combination of Adelaide and the rural settlement landscapes, as I mentioned. The two came together the two projects came together a couple of years ago. The Mount Lofty Ranges one made it to a national nomination but was not supported by the state government at the time, so it kind of stalled. And then through the Adelaide Parklands Authority, we got the Adelaide project going again and briefed the Environment Minister, because it was the previous Environment Minister who got in the way. And this Environment Minister sort of said to Adelaide Council, well, I think you need to sort of talk to the Hills Council. So that's what's been happening over the last couple of years with, expert review after expert review. So when I say that current research suggests this project could meet 3 of the World Heritage criteria, that is based on some very serious research and reviews by experts in the field, people who actually work on World Heritage nominations all the time. So we have some great talent there of people working with us, people who, Australians who are employed, for example, by the Chinese government, by the Japanese government and so on, to help get their nominations through. And this consultant has come up, this is all still early days, but this is the narrative that we're looking at. In World Heritage terms, in the same way with heritage listings, you need to demonstrate local significance or state significance or national significance. What we have to do with this project is cut to the chase of what is the global significance of Adelaide and those surveys that I showed at the beginning. And at the heart of it all is the Wakefield systematic colonisation model. And, you also need big picture themes. So obviously that is in the context of the big picture theme of migration. Okay, so that's it's the context of this project is migration and the particular model that was put forward by. And I love this particular quote because it sort of sums it up in a nutshell. I mean, the moment of the settlement of South Australia, obviously it was sort of followed the abolition of slavery, and it followed the, as we all know, or like to say, the convict settlement era. So this was a new era where you were trying to get migrants to come of their own accord. And we were incredibly successful in that regard. The number of people we managed to get to come out here in such a short space of time without a gold rush, I should add, because that came afterwards, was phenomenal. And much of the credit to that must be a credit to the Wakefield scheme. Obviously, in these things, not everything that was in the scheme was realised, and adaptations were made along the way. But at the heart, there was this scheme, and it was tried out for the first time here. It obviously then went on to influence other places, and that all helps with your World Heritage case if you can demonstrate whether something was innovative and how it went, where it came from really and where it went, all puts it in a global context. And then, once you've got your theory, you've got to have what we call attributes, or things that have endured. And so the obvious enduring attribute, if you like, in Adelaide is the plan itself and the survival. We're relatively intact. We still have a figure of 8 plan. So that's why, that's what we're trying to take into the future here, is that Adelaide plan. There's my point, which, as we can see, is, as we all know, is being eroded daily. And in this project, and also in the original sort of outlines by Wakefield, by Bentham and so on, was the idea that we would be a self-supporting economy or a colony. And so the rural aspect of the project was always at the heart of the project. So you didn't just want people speculating on town blocks. You wanted the settlers to be engaged with cultivating the rural areas. And I don't think it ever made it into an actual requirement, but the early days concept was to not let people speculate on town acres without purchasing 80 acres in the country, so forcing that productive, self-sustaining idea. And so the other attributes that we're looking at, this is all very big picture stuff, is that the way that pattern of the 80 acre section and the 100 blocks also endures in the landscape. So they're probably the two core attributes of this project. There's a long way to go to fight out what else gets included and excluded, and certainly the current consultant working on it all wants to include actual built form. He thinks that that's pretty important because in the history of World Heritage listings, simple plans have been knocked back. So we're also looking at how the built form might be brought into relating back to that original statement of how the built form from the colonial time might also reflect the ideals of the colonists, and obviously the role of churches is an important one there. There's a church for you. So yeah, here we go. Here are the other. So when you look at a cultural landscape, there's a kind of core set of values there, and or a core era. So we're looking at a cultural landscape that was planned and settled around the time of settlement of South Australia. But when you look at any cultural landscape, obviously there are layers that are there, geological layers, Aboriginal cultural layers, and then there are all the layers that come through to the present. So it's not a fixed, frozen moment in time. You have to look at these things as an ecosystem, go back to the garden, that is evolving over time. So a cultural landscape is just, again, like a garden, but it doesn't mean you're throwing away the garden when you recultivate or make different plantings and so on. So that it's a very tough thing to manage. It's not like saying, well, there's the Adelaide jail, leave it alone, let's keep it that way. There are even agricultural landscapes in Europe where the World Heritage listing is to do with just leaving it alone and keeping it that way. When you're dealing with an evolving cultural landscape, it's very much like dealing with a garden. You have to work out what you're going to keep and how you're going to manage it, and what you're going to allow to change over time. Getting back to the concepts behind this project, it's a big one, and it's we've sort of seen it as three areas of work. So there's the actual nomination process, which is all about building the case, defining where the boundaries are, defining what those attributes are going to be, and dealing with bureaucracy in terms, I think UNESCO must be the world's biggest bureaucracy. So, yeah, bureaucracy at all its levels and in all its glory. But also in the heart of this is the people, the actual participants, and how we can, as residents of Adelaide, as business people, how we can benefit from this process. And the other thing is a management tool. So, as a member of the Parklands Board, I know how messy the management of that is, and certainly the latest zone amendment proposals has brought to everyone's attention that, even though we've been on the National Heritage List for 10-ish years now, I think, or more, there's still no heritage management plan in place for the Adelaide Parklands. So, and then if you expand that to our rural landscapes, so the very much the third area that you're thinking and working in is the management area, and Australia hates dealing with the private sector in this regard. So we tend to just list, especially, not so much locally, but at the state and the national level, we tend to just list things that are owned by government because it's easier, national parks. And it's quite rare for the national list to look at private property, and even rarer for it to look at larger areas. So a groundbreaker there was when Broken Hill actually got listed. And under its current sort of planning regime, that was a real groundbreaker at the national level. And it got listed despite mining company opposition at the time, which is even more miraculous. But now the miners are into it because they realise that listing a place is not about just stopping everything, especially if it's being listed for its mining significance. It's a bit like the other day I was dealing with an application at Port Adelaide for the Alberton Oval, and the Foss Williams stand is listed for its historical significance, and in a way, private enterprise and AFL debates aside, its significance all centres around the Port Adelaide Football Club, so you kind of want to accommodate the needs of the Adelaide Football Club to a certain extent there. So I think the mining companies came round after the Broken Hill listing, and they're the biggest sponsors of it now. And certainly in the Mount Lofty Ranges, the wine industry has been behind this from day one. Looking at the values of these things, so some of these values will be global values. But, again, with the cultural landscape, you don't have to just think about the one thing that's getting it over the line, ticking the criteria, that you do have a cultural landscape, whether it's the parklands or whether it's the rural landscapes, that do give us huge value beyond just their real estate value. Just talking about some of the challenges and the context that this proposal is moving forward. Global homogenisation in all its forms, the world market forces that tend to homogenise in products and places, and how we need to battle against that kind of entropy. And just recognising, and certainly heritage over the years has moved very much from, I think it started off with preservation of artworks, it's moved to buildings, and then it moved to precincts and cities, and now very much, I think most of the World Heritage nominations these days actually span countries, so you have the whole ecosystem of the Silk Route. So if you think we've got a problem with 10 councils, that's, dozens of countries getting together to take something into the future. So the point is, and we've known this in the natural environment for a long time, but it's as equally as important in the built environment and the agricultural environment, that these things are ecosystems that need to be managed. There we go, net management. Quite fun, I stole this off the APLA website, Shane. So yes, this approach, where it is about, you can't just say no, nothing, because if we actually look at how the parklands have evolved over the last couple of hundred years, there's been enormous change. So it's not just, obviously we don't want the boundary to change, but within that boundary, with good management, we can enable these landscapes to evolve and to change over time. And the other side to all of this is how World Heritage has become one of the biggest brands in the world. And it's why most governments, if they think they could get it, it's a no-brainer. Like, Italy's always got hundreds of heritage nominations on the go. China is totally into World Heritage these days. China will divert highways to they'll literally unbuild and rebuild highways if a government, if a heritage advisor tells them that that's how they'll get location up. So we're a bit behind in that regard, I think, in Australia, in terms of actually understanding what the economic benefit of a World Heritage listing would be for this city, a lot more than a new arena, let's say. Yeah, and this concept of, coming back to this concept of future making, this brand, it is amazing how some people get it in 3 seconds. I think it's if you're of a marketing mind, I guess. Some of us are and some of us aren't. But, the wine industry got it in 3 seconds flat. This project has had various sponsors, Jurlique, the big corporate winemakers, down to all the sort of small producers. We haven't really, because I was more working in the hills, haven't really tackled the hotel industry and so on. But, anyone who looks into us, there is plenty of economic data there to show the strong impact that such a recognition can have on the branding of your city or place. And, and sometimes, all these things are nuanced, and I think Liverpool's just been taken off the World Heritage list because they have it was so successful in attracting, it is a double-edged sword in that way, in attracting attention to the city, or part of a package that did, that, they didn't manage the development and now they've been booted off. It's rare, by the way. It's only happened a couple of times, and I don't think Liverpool necessarily chose it. Someone else has chosen it. Most people realise its value, and as we see with the Great Barrier Reef, try to hang on to it regardless of the reality. So yeah, this is all about resisting homogenisation and cultivating uniqueness. Another delicate, obviously, area in all this is, ostensibly that value that we're celebrating, so-called celebrate, is a colonization value. But it is and it isn't. And World Heritage, as this room would know, heritage is not saying that everything that happened here was a good thing. Obviously, heritage is about understanding what happened here and what you learn from understanding it. So for me, it's about getting the story straight about what went on here. And certainly, from the very beginning, we have engaged with not just the Ghana. The Ghana are the ones who are government recognised, the Ngarrindjeri as well, but also other smaller groups have been involved in this project from the beginning. It's a bit of a blurry shot off the web, but this, the 10 years behind working in the hills and then coming to the city, and now it is a joint project between the city and the hills, which obviously makes perfect sense in the context of the settlement history. And the final comment is that this is, a no regrets process. It certainly has its stops and starts, I can attest to that. And it's very annoying when the momentum does get stymied. But either way, the research and the projects that come out of it, we're talking, something popped up that I should acknowledge my colleague, Professor Randy Stringer, whose idea it was to get this onto the agenda. Randy, you can tell by his name, is from America, but is now a naturalised Australian and works in the field of agricultural economics globally and loves Adelaide, and also has spent a lot of time in Italy and started to see how these agricultural landscapes in Italy were getting listed, and could see and also, read on the margins of the Good Earth before he decided to take up the job here, and so understood that we did have a fairly particular history here, and then sort of put the two and two together, that this was a World Heritage case. And, just this week I was meeting with Randy and actually an entrepreneur from Canada who is very interested in the potential. Well, he's already working, we're talking billions of dollars in the world of developing both foods but also medicines based on Canadian native knowledge and production. But he's a doer, and so he's producing things, for example, a particular algae that can cure or help with diabetes, and that sort of sphere of not just food but health projects with local Indian enterprise. Anyway, so he's somehow got into our network, and so we're talking about a project like that for him to bring some of his dollars here into South Australia to invest in that area. So just having a project going can sort of keep these other ideas and get these other ideas and projects off the ground. That's it from me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephanie.